Twink Death is a term I've seen getting flung around Twitter recently. It was originally said by gay people, mostly, and it's a slang term for this little-known biological process called getting older. Hi again, guys. And Twitter got their slimy, unwashed hands on it recently when this young versus old comparison picture of Leonardo DiCaprio went trending. The caption was, "Twink Death is terrifying," and that tweet set the innocent pile of thermite on fire. There are still toxic fumes floating around in the air. People were listing off actors they thought fit the criteria out the bunghole. Think of any relatively famous white dude you can. Keanu Reeves, Jensen Ackles, Paul Dano, anything. The criteria was basically being a celebrity who was famous around age 20 and continue to be famous at least past age 30. If you met both of those requirements, then congrats, you went through Twink Death. A lot of the posts were positive sounding, like a young actor growing out of their boyish appeal and becoming a hot single father, but some were definitely not so nice in making fun of people's looks. The Leo one was absolutely a dig at him. Look at this guy. He's old and wrinkly and gross now. Used to be young, supple, and soft skin. How terrifying. I imagine the Alex Jones one was meant to be mean. I don't know. Someone might be into how his face looks these days. And with that in mind, what I really don't want this video to be is me just pointing and laughing, going, haha, look at this old guy. They might not even be that old, and they'll be like, remember when he was young and hot? Now he's a tub of lard. How embarrassing to have kept living past age 25. That's dumb and stupid and would eventually bite me in the tush. Well, right now I've got an incredibly snatched waist, huge ass cheeks, and a gorgeous bod. The twink that is inside of me, not literally, will get murdered someday too. And I think aging shouldn't be talked about as something negative or undesirable. It's just something that's gonna happen. Love yourself as you are, even if you are seeking to change how you are. For men likers like me, Twink Death marks the start of our quarter-life crisis. When a gay realizes they can't just coast off being short and whimsical anymore, and I may have to start working on having a personality. This is one of my personal favorite copium posts. How do I accept Twink Death and move on to becoming a top? I'm gonna be 22 in a week, and I've already hit the wall for bottoms. My hairline is receding, my face is wrinkled, and I've gotten more facial hair than I can shave without leaving a shadow. But I also don't really want a top. Should I just become celibate? How did gays of old deal with this? Ancient queers from the Dark Age usually died before they hit 30, so they didn't really worry about living long enough to look old. Now, I'm not really interested in Twink Death as a way to insult someone, but rather in a meta sense, how it is a tool, a trope, and a phenomenon. It's a neutral idea that can be used for good and evil, can be reused and subverted. I want to look at Twink Death with a critical eye to discuss how it's used in stories to flesh out characters. And by that, I mean choosing to make Darth Vader's younger self a complete twink. Darth Vader's twink journey is an unconventional one. The first time we meet him is in A New Hope, and Vader is clearly well into the prime of his dad phase. The "No, I am your father" line was basically his catchphrase back then. Vader is literally the German word for father. George Lucas was really lathering it on, saying, isn't this guy just daddy material? And yeah, he is. I agree. We get it, George. You already convinced us. And in the whole original trilogy, we only see this guy live as a daddy, up until the very end, where he dies as a dad. We would have only ever thought of him in that way if it weren't for the retroactive twinkification of him.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
When the prequels were getting made and they had to pick a young buck to play Anakin, do you think they just chose Hayden Christensen for no reason? They wanted his face to look a very particular way. They had a specific look in mind. Hell, why do you think Leonardo DiCaprio, coming fresh off the Titanic, was on the short list to play him? They needed a twink for that role. Not just for marketing, but also for character and thematic reasons. I think it's actually very clever how George Lucas did this. It's probably the most underrated piece of writing from the prequels. You see, Vader considers himself and Anakin to be two different people entirely. He views Anakin as a dead man who he murdered. The metaphorical Twink Death here is very blatant. Vader turned to the dark side, got scarred up for bad boy ward veteran appeal, and grew into his new role as a father figure. In Vader's mind, in his eyes, he literally killed his twink self. He was the death of the twink. Anakin got dunked in the paper shredder, and Darth Vader is the scraps that came out the other side. And George knew Anakin was a character who was destined to become evil, imposing, and menacing from the start, so he used the soft, boyish features of Hayden's youthful face to contrast that. It makes the fall even more dramatic. The twink had to die so the father may rise. That's probably the most popular example, but my poor baby Springtrap has been through the ringer when it comes to their twink status. Do not play a drinking game with how many times I say that word in this video. You're gonna die. But you have his OG look, a classic, and an all-time great horror character design overall. It's the one most people recognize as being Springtrap, and it is without a doubt a fatherly design. He's big and hulking and looks like he gives S-tier hugs, and it's really nice. Then came along Scraptrap. This thing isn't Twink Death, Twink Birth, not even Twink Purgatory. It's from the 9th layer of Twink Hell. What a downgrade, man. There's just like no new appeal here. We lost a dad on that day and gained absolutely nothing for it. Scraptrap looks like a toddler who lost both his arm and his mom while walking around Walmart. It's so dopey looking, and not in like a cute or endearing way. It was a dud. No, the best and only real instance of Springtrap being twinkified was in FNAF VR. Look at what they turned this guy into. A little fucking whore, that's what. Tiny waist, big ass thighs, smooth skin. He's wearing nothing but that little mini crop top vest. That is an outfit a stripper wears. What kind of performances are they doing at Freddy Fazbear's these days? Regardless, this is the only other Springtrap design that I can safely say is fuckable. They tried to make him a DILF again in Security Breach, but as you probably know, with Burntrap, they killed that twink a little too violently. They overshot how many times they had to stab it to get the DILF out the other end, and turned him into a grandpa. Peepaw Afton, who needs to be in an assisted living center if you need to know. It was only ever gonna end one way with Springtrap, to be fair. The reality of Twink Death comes down on us all. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule, and when I say exceptions, it's really more like people who delay the inevitable better than others. Paul Rudd's doing a pretty damn good job of holding the Grim Reaper, but he's not gonna be able to forever. And even with that in mind, most of you are not gonna be that lucky exception. For most folks, fictional and real, Twink Death is coming no matter what at some point. Even Ash Ketchum had to become like 12 at some point, but there was one company who tried to actively fight against the almighty Father Time, and that was Capcom. They didn't just try to keep a character the same age forever, they tried to run back the clock on him. Capcom's been on a hot streak in recent years, just banger game after banger game, but it really wasn't always like that. It's a pretty recent development. When I was like 12 or 13, Capcom was one of the big game companies that was cool to hate. People used to talk about Capcom the same way we talk about Activision now. Well, maybe not that important, but it seemed that important as a 13-year-old. And I think their reputation over the years is best symbolized by whatever the fuck they were doing to Dante from Devil May Cry at a given time. This is what Dante looked like in the first game from Devil May Cry. Bro doesn't look ancient by any means. Like, sure, he's got white hair, but it's in more of an emo boy who bleaches it kind of way. That said, he also doesn't look like he could still be in high school. He's a standard young adult here who definitely has to pay taxes. Not saying he does, but he's supposed to. Come Devil May Cry 2, they actually let that motherfucker get a little older. A rare occurrence with fictional characters and franchises. Like I said, Ash Ketchum being 11 years old longer than I've been alive. And it's cool getting to see how a character changes over time in a long-running story. The only problem was that Devil May Cry 2 fucking sucked. People really did not like that shit, and yeah, for good reason. Dante looking older wasn't the problem, but more than one time, Capcom seemed to think that completely overhauling him is what would save the day. And I mean, they were right the first time with DMC3. After that game came out, everything fucking changed for Dante. I'm pretty sure 3 is the number that comes after 2, but we kind of pretend DMC2 never happened. And Devil May Cry 3 is a prequel that takes place long before even the first game. And the younger Dante we see here is very different than before. They spun that clock back so fucking much in 3. This is the most anime Dante has ever looked. Capcom basically tried to Thor Ragnarok this shit and completely changed the tone of the game. In the first 2, while it was never like grim dark, it was a little more self-serious and brooding, like Dante was a little less ironic. But here in 3, the guy's a total goofball.
Invitation, huh?
That silly little demon slayer loves pizza, walks around shirtless even when he has a jacket on to show his slutty little waist, and even when he's getting skewered like a penis getting piercings, he's still a total badass. They made Dante into a sassy twink, and it was refreshing. The bold move really worked. Like, people thought new Dante was badass and epic and the coolest person ever, mostly because he was. If you had ever heard of Dante, this is the version of the character that you probably know of. It is the most popular, and it's so much different than the more serious aesthetic of DMC 1 and 2. And you could say that it's not that out of line, because since 3 is a prequel, that this is just Dante before he becomes the man in those games, but you're fucking wrong. Like I said, most popular version of Dante there ever been. By the time Devil May Cry 4 was getting released, he had been middle-aged, transformed into a twink, and now finally aged into an adult again. Devil May Cry 4 brought back him having joint pain and arthritis, and because Dante had to get older, they gave us this brand new twink named Nero, meant to fill that pretty boy void. Thing is, Dante does not act like his Devil May Cry 1 or even 2 self in that game at all. He is through and through silly, goofy mood Dante. That's just who the character was to a lot of people after 3 came out, so that became his personality forever in every game after. He acts more like a kid as an adult than he did when he was college age, and it has kind of mixed results. This comes back to Capcom bludgeoning Dante's face into something completely different every time they think they've gone wrong. They tried to follow trends and all that, and it seemed like they realized they couldn't stop this version of Dante from aging anymore, so they got scared. They tried to hit the reset button on the whole franchise, a very popular thing to do in the early 2010s. In most people's eyes, they failed at the attempt and accidentally pressed the big do not press nuclear missile launch button. This is Dante's rebooted design. Holy fuck, is it just generic. And it's from the game DMC Devil May Cry, that being Devil May Cry, Devil May Cry. And good news, he's a twink again. Everyone will fall in love with this version, is what I imagine Capcom thought would happen. But people hated this motherfucker. They still do.
For me personally, I couldn't get past this guy's smug face.
We may have a serviceable twink in front of us once more, but it's not the one we knew and loved. To most fans, this guy was an infinitely less interesting set of cheeks than old Dante. There were riots over the loss of white hair and how generic he looked. Hundreds died in the protests. All that, and this wasn't even the version that was originally going to be in the game. The earliest reveal trailer of the reboot had this starving and cigarette smoking version of him, and it got shit on so hard upon reveal that they changed him into the version in the game today. Yeah, the move basically blew up in Capcom's face, and the game was tainted by this controversy from the start. Capcom was basically at war with its own fans, and that's not great when you want them to buy your stuff. And despite the game being pretty solid on its own merits, I still play it sometimes, having Devil May Cry as the title killed any future it might have because of what it was taking place of. Yeah, there was never a sequel. Capcom learned the hard way that you can't always turn back time, and sometimes the twinks gotta die. Time skip, the year is now 2019. It's been 6 years since the last Devil May Cry game was released. I've graduated high school, become a YouTuber full-time, and still haven't had sex. I like it that way. There is no word of the DMC reboot getting a sequel, and people considered a true DMC 5 a complete pipe dream at this point. Lots of folks thought the series was just already in the shitter, canned forever, never to be heard from again. That is until Crapcom, as they were called in 2012, randomly announced Devil May Cry 5. And I mean actually 5, not Devil May Cry 2 the second, hopefully not shit this time, a real Devil May Cry 5. Capcom, a lot like with Devil May Cry 2, had to somehow reinvigorate the series again after fucking up the last one. But this time, instead of trying to turn back time and giving us a really young and brash Dante, they learned to follow the tides of the ocean and not to fight against the current. You see, Devil May Cry 3 made Dante young, goofy, and breedable, saving the series while just pretending Devil May Cry 2 never existed. DMC 5 does the same thing, pretending the reboot never happened, but the hype around this one was not because of the reveal of a new Dante, but the return of the Dante we know and love. He acts like a sassy, confident twink, but guess what? He's got facial hair now. I cannot believe it. He's physically aged.
I'm bored.
Unbelievable. Capcom really tried to go back in time so they could get the most out of their character, and they got burnt trying. And eventually they learned to let go of the past and finally allow Twink Dante to die a peaceful death. And because of this, Dilf Dante was able to truly be born and is here to stay, presumably? Yeah, Twink Death always found a way. It's terrifying, but Dante was better off for it. So let this be a lesson to you about accepting that time will pass. You will get older, and that's okay. It's beautiful even. It's also a lesson to never give me a chance to write about character design. In the many ways I think fictional men are hot. See you next time.